panelists, both in person and virtual. We're so honored to be able to hear from you all. And of course, thank you to all of you who are here in person and from far away. We're all in this together, and it's going to take people power and solidarity to move forward. So it's really great to share space with you all. A few brief housekeeping and agenda items. We have translation to Spanish and Russian available. We also have to provide the linear translation for our in-person guests from Russian to English, so apologies to our virtual guests if you hear repeated messages, and thank you for your patience. And then halfway through, we'll have a 10 to 15 minute break and lunch will be served for our in-person guests. And we have a performance by Pavel Jr., so it's gonna be really exciting, really excited for that. And so I wanted to take a minute to frame this event a bit. We're all here because we care about doing whatever we can to mitigate climate change and ensure a just transition away from fossil fuels, but to what? We cannot repeat the mistakes of the past and call it something new. We'll hear a lot this climate week about electric vehicles and other forms of renewable technology, but what we won't hear as much about are what and who are at stake. And that's Indigenous people in the global South, who are no strangers to the devastation caused by fights for mineral control by the global North. The demand for battery-related minerals is predicted to skyrocket within the coming years. The supply chains which carry these minerals are still built upon the same colonial, exploitative, and imperialistic systems, no matter how many times the term green is used. Green capitalism is still capitalism. Our systems of greed, capitalism, and colonialism prioritize profits, leading to short-term thinking and externalized impacts such as carbon emissions. So we know that if we only treat the symptoms of the climate crisis, the renewable energy economy will replicate harms that, considering the white supremacy that global capitalism depends on, will continue to target people of the global South. So what do? We center Indigenous and peasant voices, and we lean into other methods like minerals recycling and holding companies along the supply chain accountable. A just future depends on Indigenous-led, place-based climate solutions and supporting intersectional efforts to guarantee the rights of all people. So today you'll hear from some pretty incredible people who are doing this. We cannot continue to sacrifice Indigenous people in the global South to fuel the excess and profit of the global North. So with that, it is my honor to introduce Fernanda Hoppenheim, who is the chair of the United Nations Working Group on Business and Human Rights, to say a few words about the importance of protecting Indigenous rights in transition to the green economy. So thanks all for being here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to speak in Spanish. Voy a pasarme ahora a hablar en español. Creo que todas y todos tienen la interpretación disponible al inglés, al ruso. Buenos días a todas y todos. Buenas tardes a quienes están en otras latitudes o buenas noches. Es un honor para mí unirme a esta conversación muy brevemente para compartir algunas reflexiones con ustedes. Agradezco mucho a las organizaciones que están llevando a cabo este evento. Y por supuesto a Pavel Suliandziga, ex colega del Grupo de Trabajo de Empresas y Derechos Humanos de Naciones Unidas, con quien tuve el gusto de interactuar en la visita oficial del grupo en México antes de que yo fuera integrante del grupo. Les estoy hablando desde la Ciudad de México o México Tenochtitlan y pues es un placer otra vez acompañarles. Algunas reflexiones desde el Grupo de Trabajo que tengo el honor ahora en este periodo de liderar tienen que ver sobre todo con lo que hemos visto en el terreno y lo que hemos escuchado siempre en nuestras interacciones con las personas y las comunidades de los pueblos indígenas. Particularmente estuve en Colombia en julio con personas de los pueblos indígenas de la región latinoamericana y estuvimos conversando mucho sobre la importancia del respeto a los derechos colectivos de los pueblos indígenas en nuestra región y en el mundo, entre otras cuestiones en el contexto de la transición hacia una economía verde o esta transición energética que se está tratando de impulsar en el contexto de atender a la crisis climática. Desde el grupo de trabajo, en general, en el contexto de la actividad empresarial, hemos hecho muchos esfuerzos para hacer recomendaciones para monitorear los impactos que tienen las empresas, que tienen las industrias, particularmente las industrias extractivas, que explotan los bienes naturales, que desplazan comunidades y que cometen abusos en el contexto de sus operaciones, particularmente contra o dañando, digamos, impactando negativamente los derechos de las comunidades indígenas, la importancia que tiene el respeto a los derechos y que realmente empiecen a cuestionarse las operaciones de una manera muy profunda y no solamente cosmética. Lo que estamos buscando impulsar a través de la adopción de los principios rectores de Naciones Unidas en materia de empresas y derechos humanos y de otros instrumentos es que haya un respeto a los derechos humanos en el contexto de la actividad empresarial y el medio ambiente. Otra vez, que no solo sea cosmético, sino que realmente cuestione el rol de las empresas en esta historia de abusos y explotación y de daño ambiental y de afectaciones a los derechos de las comunidades indígenas, que impulse otra forma de hacer los negocios y otra forma de organizar la economía, y creo que ahí los pueblos siempre nos han enseñado mucho, y también el rol del Estado como sujeto garante encargado de garantizar que se respeten los derechos. Y ahí es donde también esa interacción entre lo público y lo privado es bien importante. Y en el contexto de esta transición hacia una economía verde, esto no es diferente, ¿no? Como decía muy bien la colega que me precedió, estamos ante un tipo de minería, minería de transición que le llaman, que sigue funcionando con los mismos patrones que la minería que tradicionalmente hemos visto. No hay un cambio en la forma de extraer esos minerales para la transición. En las energías limpias, o en las energías, digamos, sostenibles, tampoco vemos que se respete, por ejemplo, el derecho a la consulta y al consentimiento previo, libre e informado de los pueblos y comunidades indígenas en el mundo, cuando se instalan parques eólicos o cuando se instalan otro tipo de centrales, por ejemplo, eléctricas, termoeléctricas, hidroeléctricas, etcétera, a reserva de que podamos cuestionar si eso es sostenible o no y si es energía renovable o no. Creo que es muy importante desde las Naciones Unidas, desde el grupo de trabajo, que recordemos es un procedimiento especial, somos expertas y expertos independientes, seguir trabajando de la mano con los pueblos y comunidades indígenas para impulsar una transición hacia una economía y una vida sostenible en el tiempo, con respeto cabal a los derechos de las comunidades y también con una participación en la toma de decisiones. Creo que esto es fundamental. Creo que por eso también desde el grupo de trabajo la interacción con los caucus indígenas, tanto a nivel regional como a nivel global, y en nuestro próximo foro de empresas y derechos humanos en Ginebra a finales de noviembre, esperamos contar con una amplia participación de muchas y muchos de ustedes y poder seguir en este diálogo, apoyando los esfuerzos de organización colectiva que ustedes hacen y esta lucha por el respeto a sus derechos en el contexto de la actividad empresarial. Otra vez, no creemos que la urgencia por atender la crisis climática tenga que ir, dar pasos atropellados que pasen por encima de todos los principios que hemos tratado de impulsar a lo largo de los años para mejorar la forma en que se hacen los negocios y que se reduzcan y ojalá eventualmente el cambio sea tan profundo que desaparezcan los daños al medio ambiente y a las comunidades y a las personas titulares de derecho. Entonces, pues les agradezco mucho la invitación. Mi intervención es corta y es sobre todo para saludar este esfuerzo y reiterar el compromiso desde el grupo de trabajo y mío personal para trabajar con ustedes de la mano en todo este proceso. Les mando un afectuoso saludo y les sigo escuchando. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you so much. So I'll take it from here. My name is Galina Angarova, and I come from the Abzai clan of the Hirt Nation of the Buryat peoples in Siberia. I am an Indigenous rights activist, Indigenous woman, and I also serve as the Executive Director of Cultural Survival. I live and work on the unceded territories of the Ohlone people, which is now known as the San Francisco Bay Area. I go by she, her. And it's a pleasure to be able to be here with you in person, and also I greet people who are joining us virtually. There's a lot to cover. We were able to bring in incredible speakers, both in person and virtually, to cover the topic. So I'm here on behalf of Cultural Survival, and I'm also here on behalf of the SIRGE Coalition, of the newly formed SIRGE Coalition. Just a little bit about Cultural Survival. We are an Indigenous-led Indigenous rights organization that works to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples, right to self-determination, cultures, and political resilience. Since 1972, we are over 50 years old. As an organization, we are a staff of 30 people working in 10 countries around the world. Most of our staff are Indigenous. Most of our staff are women working from their own communities, serving their own communities. And we work through a holistic strategy that includes advocacy, capacity building, communications, and grant making. Thematically, we focus on a nexus of themes dedicated to climate change solutions, lands and livelihoods, Indigenous community media, cultures and languages, and Indigenous women and youth as a cross-thematic thread. So on August 9th, the World Indigenous Day, we launched a new website. It's sirgecoalition.org, SIRGE coalition.org. It was part of the plan that took us 2.5 years to finally arrive at that moment where we could announce ourselves as a new coalition, SIRGE Coalition, to secure the rights of Indigenous peoples in transition to a green economy. It took 2.5 years of relationship building, trust building, hard work, strategy, planning, hundreds of hours of conversations over Zoom, because we started this during the pandemic, but we finally arrived at the moment where we could say, here we are. We are an Indigenous-led coalition that unites many organizations, both Indigenous and allied, and many individuals across the world who are gathering here to secure the rights of Indigenous peoples. So our main goal, of course, is to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples and uphold our rights as prescribed by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to our lands and territories, to our resources, to our cultures, our languages. And one of the most important rights is our right to free, prior, and informed consent, which is a right both procedural and substantive, right? It's both a process and a right in itself, and it should be upheld the way it is prescribed by the UN Declaration, which is the main document, international standard, minimal standard for Indigenous peoples globally. We endeavor to protect our rights throughout the life cycle of transitional minerals, starting with extraction, mining, production, consumption, sale, recycling of these materials. So what are transition minerals? These minerals are cobalt, copper, lithium, nickel, zinc, and 20+ other minerals that are required in large quantities to produce renewable energy technologies, from wind turbines to solar panels to electric vehicles and storage units. And the demand for these minerals is rising. You probably found some articles online that they predict 40-fold increase of lithium production. So that's a lot of lithium. And as the global demand is rising, we call upon governments, corporations, investors, and other decision makers to avoid the mistakes of the past. And there have been many mistakes when Indigenous peoples have been decimated throughout the history, especially the 500 years of colonization. We need to avoid dirty mining to protect the rights to self-determination of Indigenous peoples globally, around the world, and many of whom live in the areas that are rich in these minerals. So I just also wanted to point out that Indigenous peoples' lands and territories span 24% of the global terrestrial surface. And these territories and lands are home to 80% of the remaining global biological diversity. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. The reason for that is our knowledge, is our traditional knowledge that is tied to the land. It's because of that knowledge we're able to communicate, to be with that land, to be in that spirit relationship to the land, to understand it, feel it with all of our senses. And it's important that we protect and preserve that traditional knowledge of Indigenous peoples for the future, not for the future just of Indigenous peoples, but for all people. So I just briefly will go into this history, kind of the origin story of this coalition, which started with a tragic event. In May of 2020, there was a huge spill of 21,000 tons of diesel in the Russian Arctic, into the waterways of many indigenous communities who live in the Russian Arctic. Unfortunately, the fishing grounds and the hunting grounds of these peoples were decimated. There's no more fish. The deer moved about 100 kilometers away from the original hunting grounds. Later, a few months later, Russian indigenous leaders reached out to us, Pavel and I, asking for support to make a global campaign to let people know what happened in the Russian Arctic. And we did. We did a global campaign on Facebook, on other social media outlets, urging companies not to buy nickel from Nornickel, which is the largest polluter and producer of nickel in the world. And we also learned that that summer of 2020, Tesla was announced that they were looking for new supply chains for nickel. So that's what we did. We asked companies, including Tesla, not to buy nickel from Nornickel. Through our connections with Earthworks, we were able to establish direct contact with Tesla. And for several months, we were in negotiations. I can't disclose a lot of the details. We signed a non-disclosure agreement. But we quickly found out that there is no existing supply chain with Nornickel. And a few months later, we got an Indigenous Peoples policy as part of Tesla's supplier code of purchasing code. So we got really inspired. We got into conversations with BASF, which is the largest chemical company out of Germany, got into a conversation with that company. We got into conversations with Credit Suisse and UBS, investors who are investing in different projects, development projects all over the world. So these dialogues have been successful so far, and we quickly realized that as Indigenous peoples, we have a voice. We have leverage, that a lot of these companies, they are subject to reputational risks, and therefore they're subject to material risks, right? So we also learned from our experiences that we learned the scope of the problem and the extent to which Indigenous peoples are being affected by transition minerals mining all over the world. It's not just Russia. It's Democratic Republic of Congo. It's Indonesia. It's Guatemala. It's the triangle of lithium, Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. It's the United States. Now folks are eyeing Greenland because they've realized that the ice is melting and there are some transition mineral deposits in Greenland. So we learned quickly that many of our sisters and brothers are going to be impacted. So that's why we decided to create a global coalition and invite people to join in. So as I said, since May of 2020, we had hundreds of hours of strategy building and conversations among us. and we're finally here. We've met with scholars, we met with allies, partner organizations, we met with many Indigenous leaders, activists. And in the course of the conversation, we managed to build that trust. And we can only move at the speed of trust. And I want to congratulate our participating organizations, our members of the coalition on this launch on August 9th. So I'm going to pause here. I would like to introduce my dear friend, my mentor, an incredible Indigenous leader, Pavel Suliandziga, who used to serve as the member of the UN Permanent Forum. He used to serve as the member and the chair of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. He is the president of the Batani Foundation. So I'm going to give the word to Pavel, and Kesha will be providing linear translation. Thank you so much, Kesha. Maybe Pavel, you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about the coalition. Thank you.
I will speaking into mic too.
No,
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much.
Спасибо, Галин, за ваше выступление, за то, что вы рассказали об идее, создания нашей коалиции, о том, как мы работали по акции, связанной с Торникелем.
Thank you, Galina, for your introductory remarks, for explaining how the coalition was started with our action on Nornickel.
Меня зовут Павел Сулиндзига, я представитель народа Удеге, это коренной народ на Дальнем Востоке России.
My name is Pavel Suliandziga. I represent the Udege people of the far east of Russia, indigenous peoples.
Я хотел бы очень коротко сказать о своем народе, и я постараюсь рассказать историю очень короткую своего народа с тем, чтобы как раз связать историю моей общины, моего народа вот с нашей коалицией, с тем, что мы делаем.
Very briefly, I'd like to tell you the history of my people, and parts of that history relate directly with the beginning of our coalition.
Я думаю, что история моего народа, она очень похожа на историю других коренных народов.
I think the history of my people tracks the history of other indigenous groups.
Мой народ примерно до конца 70-х годов насчитывал 8 групп.
Until the 1970s or so, there were about 8 groups of my people, of the Udege people.
И вот в конце 70-х годов прошлого века у удегейцев осталось только 4 группы.
And since then, we're down to 4 groups.
При этом, конечно, это был советский период, при этом никто не проводил прямого геноцида в отношении моего народа, физически нас не уничтожали, но 4 группы моего народа исчезли.
So this was happening in the context of a Soviet history during the Soviet era, and of course, no one was putting us through a genocide of any type, but nevertheless, during that period, we've lost 4 distinct groups of the Udege people.
Это произошло по очень простой причине. Удегейцы – это охотники, это мой народ, который живет в уссурийской тайге.
There's a very simple explanation for that. We are hunters. The Udege people hunt in the Syrian taiga.
И вот у тех 4 групп, которые исчезли, просто вырубили тайгу.
And the 4 groups that are gone now, they've simply lost their habitat. There is no more taiga there.
И после этого они исчезли.
And that led to their disappearance.
Я являюсь представителем группы удегейцев, которая называется Бикинке, то есть это удегейцы, которые живут на реке Бикин.
The group I represent, that I come from, is called Bikinke. It's the people who live on the Bikin River.
История, история, современная история моего народа, примерно начиная с конца 80-х годов, заканчивая, наверное, 2015 годом, это сплошная история войны, битвы моего народа за свою территорию.
And if you look at the modern history of my people, starting in the 1980s through about 2015, I would characterize it as a constant struggle, as a struggle for survival for my people.
Лесопромышленники, золотопромышленники, браконьеры, представители туристического бизнеса, губернаторы, разные генералы и так далее. Все хотели прибрать своим рукам, да, своим жадным рукам нашу территорию, богатую ресурсами.
My people faced multiple challenges throughout that period, from poachers to illegal miners to gubernatorial administrative representatives to military representatives to illegal logging. Different businesses have all threatened our community since the 1980s.
Я сразу хочу сказать, что в итоге все-таки мой народ вот в этой борьбе одержал победу. Мы заключили договор с администрацией президента России и создали на нашей территории, на территории моего народа, национальный парк Бикин в соуправлении с правительством.
And yet we emerged victorious in this struggle. My people were able to sign a direct agreement with the presidential administration, the Russian Federation's presidential administration, to establish a national park on the Bikin River, and it's still there.
И вот какие уроки о каких уроках буквально коротко хотел бы рассказать, почему мы смогли, малочисленный народ, победить в этой борьбе.
And there are several lessons from that struggle, lessons that help us understand how a small community, a small numbered people, were able to win this fight.
Первое – это то, что когда мы начинали нашу борьбу, да, когда вот в конце 80-х годов нашу территорию продали, когда мы начали борьбу, да, мы для себя решили, что мы будем внутри нашей общины, внутри удегейцев, руководствоваться принципами единства, доверия и открытости между членами общины.
First of all, is the community rallied around the values of unity, of solidarity and trust during the early stages of the struggle. So when when the initial decision to sell our lands was made in the 1980s, we came together and we decided to abide by a certain code and rely on values in this struggle.
Единство, оно стало для нас очень важным, и наша позиция была такой, что одного человека могут арестовать, 10 человек могут арестовать, 100 человек могут арестовать и уничтожить, но весь народ не уничтожен.
Unity was a key factor. We understood that one person can be arrested, 10 people can be arrested, but the whole group of us will not be.
Единство, оно было очень важным, потому что правительство постоянно пыталось рассорить нас друг с другом, между членами общины.
The government attempted to divide and conquer us, tried to disrupt our unity. That was also an important position for them.
Я могу сказать, что федеральные и краевые власти приезжали снимать меня с работы, когда я уезжал в командировку, 4 раза. Потому что сами снять они не могли, я был выбран своим народом. Они приезжали в мое отсутствие и обманывали, да, что вот Suliandziga уехал, он вас продал, он плохой человек, там, и так далее, и так далее.
I represented our voices in an elected position, so the government could not have easily dismissed me, but they nevertheless made multiple attempts to spread misinformation and lies to try to persuade the public to remove me from my leadership role while I was away from the community, while I was traveling for work.
На что мои люди, мои удегейцы говорили этим чиновникам, властям, что хорошо, он все равно вернется, да, у него здесь дети, у него семья, и мы с ним поговорим. Если он нас предал, продал, мы с ним без вас разберемся, мы его в нашем веке не утопим.
And my people answered simply. They said to the federal and regional authorities who would come before them, they would tell them, well, Pavel will be back at some point. His family lives here. This is where his home is. And if he's lying to us, if he's cheating us out of anything, we'll deal with him appropriately. We'll deal with him by the laws of our people. We'll drown him, essentially, if you will, in the river.
Что касается открытости, это тоже было очень важным, потому что все вопросы, которые касались нашей общины, нашей территории, наших ресурсов, мы всегда обсуждали все вместе, и каждый удегеец чувствовал, что его позиция, его ответственность за территорию, за свой народ очень велика.
Our value of openness was also key because from early on, we discussed things as a community and everyone was empowered to speak and everyone understood that their opinion will be heard and has a role within the larger conversation and discussions.
И еще об одном принципе, о котором бы я хотел сказать, почему вот одно из условий, да, нашей победы, это то, что мы бы одни не победили. Да? И для нас было важным найти союзников. И этими союзниками для нас стали местные жители, жители Приморского края, нашего района. Это были ученые, экологи, правозащитники, эксперты. И это является одним из важнейших условий любой победы.
A third factor that was key in our victory and something without which we could not have achieved what we did was this was our allies. And we had many, many allies regionally and federally and later on internationally. So we worked with activists, we worked with scientists, we worked with environmental communities and individuals in the Far East who helped us address our cause.
Поэтому, когда мы обсуждали создание нашей коалиции, да, для того, чтобы мы могли эффективно защищать права коренных народов, чтобы общины наши могли сами себя защищать, конечно, мы в том числе во главу угла взяли эти принципы.
And so while we were establishing this coalition in recent years, we are also trying to rely on the same principles to promote and advance Indigenous peoples' rights.
Спасибо большое, Павел. И I would like to ask a question. So could you please elaborate a little bit more about our coalition, the structure of the coalition, and what are main goals, what are our main objectives in the coming years?
Да, когда, вот, Галина, вы уже рассказывали по поводу нашей работы, связанной с акцией по Норникелю, у нас появилось очень много, я считаю, очень важных, ценных друзей и союзников.
A key result of our campaign targeting Nordnickel, as you've mentioned, Galina, was our ability to attract allies during that public campaign.
Вот тогда мы впервые познакомились с Бритни, с ее организацией, которые оказали нам огромную помощь.
That's, for example, when we met Brittany for the first time and the organization that helped us considerably and tremendously during this struggle.
При этом я хотел бы, вот Галина уже говорила, я хотел бы подчеркнуть, что, конечно же, Норникель является огромной компанией, у которой огромные ресурсы, у которой огромные возможности, в том числе и на международном уровне.
Of course, I keep underscoring that Nornickel is a very big company with huge resources and lots of sway domestically and internationally.
И при этом мы столкнулись с тем, что Норникель продолжал политику лжи, да, нарушения прав коренных народов. Конечно, это требовало огромных усилий с нашей стороны.
But what we saw from Nornickel was this continuation of policy of lies, of violating indigenous people's rights, and that was a continuous cause of our concern.
Галина уже сказала, что мы провели очень плодотворные переговоры с компанией Tesla. При этом у нас до сих пор продолжаются переговоры с нефтехимической компанией BSF.
As Galina also mentioned, we engaged in dialogue, very constructive dialogue with Tesla's representatives. We also engaged with the German giant BASF.
Наши представители нашей коалиции выезжали при содействии еще одной очень нашей хорошей дружественной организации в Женеву, в Швейцарию, где встречались со швейцарскими банками, швейцарским правительством, парламентом.
Our advocates from the coalition, representatives from the coalition, were able to also go to Switzerland with the assistance of another member of the coalition, a trusted partner, and my colleagues met with the representatives of the banking industry in Geneva, for example.
Наши представители также очень много провели большую работу в Германии, в Европейском Союзе, Еврокомиссии.
My colleagues engaged with in work in Germany and with the European institutions as well.
И, конечно же, вот в процессе этой работы у нас появилась идея, мы много провели переговоров с представителями коренных народов из других регионов мира по как раз вот созданию SIRGE Coalition.
And the idea for the SIRGE coalition came from all those engagements, in addition to our consultations with the indigenous groups outside of the, perhaps the Arctic, or the indigenous groups living in other areas of the world.
Сегодня структурно наша SIRGE коалиция выглядит таким образом. У нас есть руководящий комитет и координационный комитет.
So structurally, we have two committees currently, a coordinating committee and a steering committee.
Руководящий комитет, он состоит из 16 представителей коренных народов.
So the steering or executive committee includes 16 representatives of indigenous peoples.
Это представители 7 регионов мира, на которые поделен регионы коренных народов.
From 7 regions of the world where indigenous people live.
По 2 человека от каждого региона.
We have 2 representatives from each region.
И координационный комитет, он состоит из представителей организаций, которые занимаются вопросами поддержки, координации нашей работы, то есть ежедневной нашей работы.
And the coordinating committee includes representatives of coalition and different organizations who engage in the day-to-day support of our work.
И опять же, по нашей общей договоренности коалиции, председателем в том числе и Координационного комитета является представитель коренных народов.
And as we decided in consultation with indigenous groups, is that the chair of the coordinating committee is also a representative of indigenous people.
Спасибо большое. Спасибо, Pavel. So just thanking Pavel for the information. I wanted to move to our next speaker, if that's okay. So I just wanted to ask if Kate Finn is able to join us.
Hello, Galina. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So great to see you on the big screen. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
So Kate Finn is the Executive Director of First Peoples Worldwide, an organization situated within the University of Colorado at Boulder that works to build corporate accountability to the rights of Indigenous peoples at the intersection of law, finance, and business. Kate's areas of focus and expertise include Indigenous peoples law and policy, federal Indian law, preventing violence against women, sustainable finance, and business and human rights. Kate is an enrolled citizen of the Osage Nation. Welcome, Kate. And just, I'll ask a very simple question. What's the role of the First Peoples Worldwide in the coalition? And maybe you can share your expertise with the implementation of the UN Declaration, as well as the free, prior, informed consent. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Galina. It's good to see everyone. Good to see you, Brittany. Good to see you, Pavel, up on stage, and good to see everyone here in the virtual space as well. And my many thanks to the chair of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights for making such a powerful intervention at the beginning of this event. I'm really thrilled to be a part of this. So yeah, so why am I here? What are we doing here at First Peoples Worldwide and the SIRGE Coalition? So our expertise at First Peoples Worldwide over the last 30 years has been to build bridges between the private sector and Indigenous peoples. And what that involves is building the business case for free, prior, and informed consent. And we've been able to do this led by Indigenous peoples and tribal leaders for so long. And I'll just tell a really quick story that actually is a very long story, but we've been working for several years with the Gwich'in Steering Committee to protect their sacred coastal plain in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This area of the refuge, the northernmost area, is sacred. It is a part of their creation story. It is a beautiful and pristine area. The Gwich'in are caribou people. They've followed the caribou since time immemorial, and they have worked in a concerted fashion since the 1980s to prevent oil and gas drilling. Well, by operation of law, that coastal plain was set for leasing by oil and gas companies in 2021. And we've been able to work with a coalition of people, with the executive director of the Gwich'in Steering Committee and with a number of others, to build a business case, to speak with banks, to speak with insurance companies, and to show them the incredible risk that is involved in oil and gas drilling, and the fact that if oil and gas drilling occurred, it would run roughshod not only over the cultural and spiritual rights of the people who have lived there since time immemorial, but their economic priorities, their environmental priorities, and everything else. And I'll just say that at this point, there are 29 global banks who have said that they refuse to provide financing for drilling in the Arctic, and 14 global insurance companies who also have policies preventing oil and gas drilling. So with that story, what I'd like to say is that there are levers in the private sector. There are things that companies, insurance companies, and banks can do to protect and respect the rights of Indigenous peoples. So with that work and that body of work that we've done at First Peoples Worldwide, it's our honor to step into the SIRGE Coalition, to be part of the planning committee, to have come this far, and really to champion Indigenous-led solutions, Indigenous-led priorities for this new economy. And I appreciate, and I want to thank Brittany for her remarks earlier. She had said in our rush, in our urgency to come up with solutions to climate change, let's not just create the same thing with a different name. Let's not create a green economy that doesn't actually integrate the rights of all people, human rights of all people, and the rights of Indigenous peoples. And we have a moment now as a coalition, I believe, to show what change can be, to really elevate Indigenous leaders and Indigenous solutions. And what I mean by Indigenous solutions is that many, many Indigenous peoples are on the front lines of climate change. They're the ones experiencing the harsh weather events, experiencing what goes on. And let's bring those solutions into our conversation. So for example, if you live in a place where when there's an energy disturbance and your energy is the first off and then the last on when energy is restored, you've probably come up with some creative ways to deal with that. You know what to do when there is an energy disturbance. Let's get those voices into our economic conversation. Let's understand what's going on in Indigenous territories so that we can all come up with solutions that integrate all of our perspectives.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kate. It's so great to see you, and I hope we see each other in person in October. So I would like to bring in Gary McKinney, spokesperson for the people of the Red Mountain and scout for the American Indian movement in Northern Nevada. He's a Western Shoshone, Northern Paiute tribal descendant of the Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone and Duck Valley Shoshone Paiute peoples. Thank you so much, Gary. Gary was supposed to be here in person, but unfortunately you couldn't come. But I'm so grateful that you're able to join us virtually and tell your story as a frontline defender of your peoples and your sacred lands here on the Turtle Island. The word is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon to wherever you are. My name is Gary McKinney. I am from the Western Shoshone Northern Paiute people in northeastern Nevada, and also a member of the SIRGE Coalition, the steering committee. I will do my best here to let everybody know in such a short amount of time. So let's get into it. You know, I am a member of the People of Red Mountain Committee. It's Atza Kudakwa Wanuwa in our traditional language. That's the Northern Paiute part of our state. However, I was raised on the Duck Valley Indian Reservation, which is primarily Shoshone. But my mother is from the Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone tribe, which is the closest to what they call the Thacker Pass lithium mine. It's the biggest lithium deposit in this country, in America right now. And so I'm going to talk about from start to finish and some things that I've seen while my time speaking for our rights in this mine. They fast-tracked Thacker Pass on January 15th of 2021 with the Trump administration, and the Biden administration picked it up, and they fast-tracked it, which means they expedited the whole processes and the procedures that they're supposed to follow. They crammed it all into one shot, and the environmental impact statement was produced. And the environmental impact statement, you know, there has been some organizations that have taken their examinations of it, and it's the poorest EIS that they've ever seen. You know, to put it in perspective, an environmental impact statement should take about 4 to 5 years to complete, to watch the seasons, to watch the ecosystems, to watch let's call those the rights of nature. And so that disturbance that they want to do is including dewatering. Well, first it's going to be an open pit mine, and so we have to think about the ecosystems that are in proximity of that mine. not only human life, because we're only talking about, well, when we hear about these procedures and things, all they're talking about is the humans, us, and you know, they're not ever do they consider the endangered list. There are a number of species in the Thacker Pass area that are on the endangered species list. But however, the consultation was cut out with this being fast tracked. And so with it being fast tracked consultation, everything's extinguished. And, you know, environmentally, that's a little bit of what I can tell you. In dewatering, you know, I'm gonna go ahead and say 1.7 billion gallons of water per year if Thacker Pass open pit lithium mine goes up. They call it green energy transition, but what's so green about dewatering, taking the water out of the area? And what's so green about leaving a big hole in the ground? What's so green about killing all the grass and scaring all the wildlife away? And so we're not just talking about the rights of the mining corporations, we're talking about the life in general, the water. You know, to put it into perspective for you all, you know, we're big on water out here. It's medicine. I'm always saying, you know, if you go walk out into the desert, what's the first thing you're gonna want once you get thirsty? Is it money, or is it gonna be some water? There's one thing right there, you know, how you describe water as life, but then you know, to us, when a mother gives an expecting mother, when her water breaks, that water, you know, that water is life. That's when we know life is on its way. And so what are we doing by allowing these corporations to come in and take that water? Because you're taking, this is an equation, you're removing water from the land. What are you putting there? A hole. What on this earth can survive off of no water? And that's our problem here. You know, to kind of walk you up to that point with the environmental side, I'm going to let you all know about the history part, because this is where our violations are really happening. The atrocities that happened before there was state lines, before there was reservations, you know, they call it colonization. To us, you know, it's this is what it is. You know, this is why they say colonization. This is why our history, this is why they say oppressed, this is why they say rights violations, is because when these mining corporations started, I'm gonna go ahead and put you for 5 minutes in your head. Think of you're in a desert climate, call it Nevada, and the timeline is 1864 to 1868. For those of you who don't know your American history, the slaves were freed in 1864. The state of Nevada was also brought into statehood on that year to help the presidential campaign. President Lincoln, we all know, freed the slaves. At the same time, this president freed the slaves, he ordered the hanging of 38 Dakota Indians. For what? Well, according to our oral history, which does not, it is true to us, but we're having to go beyond and above and beyond to explain to these policies and procedure holders that this is the way it is for us. But the war of extermination was between 1864 and 1868. You Google it, you can Google it, and it'll show you the Snake War. It was the bloodiest battle in, you know, George Armstrong Custer was killed in the Battle of Little Bighorn, and that produced about 847 casualties. Well, the Snake War, the War of Extermination, produced about 1,762 men were killed, wounded, and captured on both sides. And so there, before reservations, there was this landscape, and our people, our ancestors, were able to go to places and follow the water, follow the food, the roots, you know, so there was these camps that were made along those times. And because of the mining, back then it was silver and gold, manifest destination, manifest destiny. When they came, when the people from the East moved on, we'll say moved to put it mildly, but really it was an invasion. They went across the land out west to get to California. And what happened on their way there is what is in question. How to go about those things, how to go about those stories, how to confirm those stories when all this time has elapsed. And if we don't talk about it, it's going to be another thing that's extinguished. And so our history in that area, you know, they near Thacker Pass is the location of one of many massacres, murders, you know, massacres of women, children, and elders, and their food was burned. And according to American history, what they're not going to tell you in the history classes is that, yeah, the United States Army hunted our ancestors. They hunted them because they didn't want to come to the reservation. And so that right there, that's where the rights violation starts, was when we were forced to move away. You know, we were massacred if we didn't want to move to the reservation. And then now we fast forward over 150 years, we got these corporations in that same way coming in to talk to us about mining, about the green energy transition. Does it sound familiar? It sounds familiar because they did the same things to our ancestors back in those days during the treaty days. 1864 was the Boise Valley Treaty, October 10th. And that's the anniversary for that's coming up in the history that those treaties were drafted on. You know, those treaties are left open. There's no conclusion. There's no saying, okay, we're giving you this land to mine. It was taken through manifest destiny, and our people always want to look out for each other. We need the water. We need that food. We need the fish. We need those roots, and we need those medicines. And those are things right there that are being taken from us for this, in exchange for this lithium. And they're calling it a sacrifice zone. And to us, to me, to my family, to our relatives that aren't on this tribal council, that aren't on these tribal governments, what do we have to say? Well, I'm one voice of many, and the way that we see things, the way that we were raised, the history that we know, and the things that we want to protect and preserve align differently with what those council members want. Sometimes these tribal governments, they sell out. And I'm saying that because in central Nevada, they have gold mining. And it's been that way since those years I was describing to you. And when I say, you know, this is a project to mine water, you know, especially at 1.7 billion gallons of water a year, you know, there's no big question about, you know, where the drought's coming from, because I'm gonna let you guys know that this dewatering process that they do have, it alters the water. Think of Mother Earth as having DNA. Well, they're taking one neutron, one proton out of that DNA strand, and they're plugging something else in there. So you've heard of things like you know, DNA extraction and things like that. Well, this is what they're doing. They're extracting that water from a certain area, and they're rerouting it to go to their mine. Whatever water, if there's another water table nearby, they're gonna suck that water table dry and replace what they took. And so that's their dewatering process. there's a spring called Mount Denabo in Shoshone country that's it's got a mine, or it's got a spring on top, a natural spring. And how this gold mine got under it was they tapped into the spring, that the natural spring siphoned that water out of there, so that spring up on top was running dry. But they went and plugged themselves into another water table and started putting water into that spring. And so that spring was still letting water out, but it just wasn't the natural water that it was once, that it once had. And those are the policies and procedures that we need to be looking out for, because it's not the same water. The water that they're taking, they're leaving behind, and they're greenwashing us all of us. They're saying that this green energy transition is great and it's good for the environment, but it only looks like it's good for the green, the money. And if we're not aware of that, we're gonna be handing these foreign corporations, we're gonna be handing them our water, handing them our land. They're gonna be selling it back to us. They're gonna be selling it back to us for twice as much. And so is it good? I don't know. The way that these people are thinking, to in my opinion, is that as long as it doesn't, that they're in this job for say 30, 40 years in their career and they check out. Well, what happens after that? We have to deal with that. Our people have been dealing with all these atrocities, these massacres, and with this mining, they're cutting out consultation. And so my voice and other people's voices that are like-minded will soon not have this opportunity to speak like this. And it is important that we do speak about these atrocities and about our history, because that's our narrative. That's what our people and our ancestors, that's the life and the rights that they had, and we descended from that. We are the ones that are in this position now to come together and speak. And there might be some people out there right now listening that haven't heard anything about Thacker Pass, but then there's some that heard only the environmental part, and then there are some that might have only heard the cultural aspect of it. And like I said in the beginning, I'm gonna do my best to give you all the information that I can in this short amount of time. But I just really feel that our people, our indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere have been going through genocide since those early days, and through these residential schools and boarding schools, because we have them too, and our ancestors, our people have also been through those turbulent times. And we have a brother out here that is no longer with us, Myron Dewey. He spoke a lot about that, and to this day, those words are still ringing true. And so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. I hope that people were able to get a little bit more information from this. I wish I could have been there in person, but I'm around if anybody wants to get more information. I appreciate you all for listening. I hope I spoke enough. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your intervention. And I know that it's not easy. We have to attend to our family, but I really appreciate your intervention. Just wanted to bring in another speaker, another frontline defender, Gennady Shukin. Gena, вы на связи? Гена.
Hello.
Слышим. Здравствуйте.
Добрый вечер. Здорово,
Okay. Gennady is an incredible indigenous rights activist defender who lives in the territory that is being affected by that 21,000 tons of diesel spill. Геннадий, я хочу вас пригласить, представиться, да, tell us about yourself, but also tell what the situation on the ground. Спасибо.
Ну, меня зовут Геннадий Щукин. Я сам по национальности долганин. Живу в Арктике, как раз где вот был разлив большой нефти из норильского никеля. Это более 20 с лишним тысяч тонн вылилось в наше озеро, в наши реки. Беда очень, скажем так, сплотила нас, но с одной стороны не только сплотила, но нанесла непоправимый вред и наше будущее. Что делать Норильск? Норильск начинает более-менее как-то еще крутиться, но чтобы мы не поднимали шум, Норильск начал скупать общины, покупать им снегоходы, уделять им деньги, покупать активистов, чтобы они молчали, чтобы они не поднимали шум. Я все равно поднял шум, писал везде письма, поднимал народ. И так получилось, что Норильский никель против меня создали Координационный совет из коренных народов. Туда стали входить общины, которые нуждались в помощи и вынуждены были туда войти. И Норильский никель их теперь опекает, покупает им там все, и деньги выделяет. И теперь люди надеются не на рыбу, не на природу, а на то, чтобы им деньги выдали. Вот чего достиг Норильский никель. И теперь мы как бы стоим в дилемме, как быть. Либо поклониться Норильскому никелю с его большими деньгами и связями и как-то спастись от голода, либо бороться, как наши старики, когда они в 1932 году, еще прошлого века, подняли восстание вооруженное, но их жестоко уничтожили. Также уничтожили и домашнее оленеводство. Сейчас Норильский никель хвалится, пиарится и говорит, что оказывает помощь коренным народам. Но это всего лишь скупка тем, чтобы мы молчали. Люди неграмотные, много чего не понимающие, они думают, что это помощь, и хвалят Норильский никель. И говорят, что он нам помогает, не чтобы мы с голоду не умерли. Но между собой всегда говорят, что борьба за нашу жизнь теперь очень тяжелая. И, Геннадий, все надежда на тебя и на коалицию, которая создана сейчас. Я очень рад, что меня туда избрали. Я могу говорить через эту коалицию не только о наших проблемах, но и о наших предложениях, как выжить, как спасти природу, как спасти то, что осталось от наших предков. Защитить нашу природу можем только коллективно, потому что мне одному очень тяжело. Вокруг очень много спецслужб, силовых структур, которые давят. В частности, вот мою общину каждый раз задерживают, забирают мясо, забирают оружие, снегоходы, возбуждают уголовные дела. Недавно вот у нас мясо забрали, изгноили. И теперь вот мы готовимся к суду. И это каждый раз так делается. Тем, чтобы настроить само население против нашей же борьбы, то есть против меня. Что якобы из-за меня такие проблемы у всех охотников. Что якобы из-за меня их задерживают, из-за меня их арестовывают, из-за меня их забирают оружие, снегоходы. Но при этом не говорят, что последствия это будут для этих же народов, где я и живу. Что мы же и страдаем. То есть нас, получается, бьют. И сами местные, которые отдались деньгам и только чтобы сегодня выжить. И тем начальникам, которые все покрывают. И таким коррупционерам, которые там сидят у власти. И таким же олигархам, как Потанину, который деньгами затмил все. И не дает нам спокойно не охотиться, не рыбачить. И не вести спокойно защиту своей природы. И всякий раз настраивает силовые структуры против нас, конкретно против меня. Потому что сколько раз уже возбуждали уже уголовные дела против меня. И мне пришлось дойти до Конституционного суда, чтобы выиграть суд. И мы выиграли наше право на охоту, на свободную охоту. Но охотинспекция, полиция, им все равно, они все равно задерживают, они все равно преследуют, они натравливают на нас налоговую инспекцию, проверки всякие. Делают все, что угодно, чтобы мы ничего не делали, а лишь послушно ждали с протянутой рукой, когда нам дадут деньги, когда они распределят это все. Это просто ужас какой-то. И это все спокойно проходит, потому что сейчас у нас рыбы нету. И люди вынуждены брать эти деньги, потому что дети нуждаются и в тепле, и в уюте, и чтобы они сытые были. Потому что мы сами находимся очень далеко от районного центра. Это почти 400 километров. И там нет дорог. И лететь можно только вертолетом, либо летом на барже или на лодке. А лодка маленькая. У нас одна семья на лодке перевернулась, и хозяйка утонула. И мы еле ее вытащили. Люди спасались как могут. И поэтому ситуация, которая сейчас находится, в частности с Норильским никелем, не контролируется ни властями, ни кем. И он делает, что хочет. И зеленая экономика, я уверен, и наша коалиция очень много сделает. Есть потенциал, есть будущее, есть цель сохранить природу. Ведь природа дала нам жизнь, и мы не должны уничтожать эту жизнь. Это не позволит, во-первых, нам матушка Земля. Она нас просто стерет с лица земли. И даже дома крепкие, и даже армия, и все остальное не спасет человечество, если мы погубим нашу природу, которая нас кормит. И нас естественным образом как-то все отрывают от природы. Все стараются проводить концерты, танцы, форумы всякие, праздники, тем, чтобы мы танцевали, плясали в организациях Объединенных Наций, в красивых костюмах. И все это показывали мировому сообществу, что мы распляшем, значит, у нас все хорошо. Это не так. На местах очень плохо. Пьянство. Есть безработица. Люди не могут найти работу, кроме как охотиться и рыбачить. А нас ограничивают в охоте, потому что выделяют маленький процент для выживания природных ресурсов. Те животные, которые нас всегда кормят. Также ограничивают в рыбалке. Допустим, 5 килограммов рыбы одного сорта дают на 1 год на одного человека. Вот как на 5 килограммов сделать так, чтобы было сыто и семье, и чтобы что-то купить, и кто-то еще содержать на будущий сезон. И поэтому мы выживаем очень, скажем так, очень плачевно. Те законы, которые у нас есть, они, скажем так, для пафоса такие хорошие, но не скажу, что они прямо все решают. Нет. Деньги пропадают где-то в других структурах, коммерческих структурах, тех же Норильском никеле, экологические взносы, которые должны идти. Нам, по идее, идут федеральные структуры, а те потом уделяют деньги дальше куда-то. Дома у нас еще старые, только начинают якобы строиться. Да, строятся дома, но не такие, скажем так, не приспособленные к арктической жизни, потому что многие покрываются потом плесенью, пропадают или сваи рушатся. Вся технология нарушается, но зато везде пишется, что Норильский никель строит. Сейчас они недавно принимали решение, кстати, по международному якобы способу, выселить местное население из поселка Тухарт, где есть оленеводы. и ссылаются на международные принципы СПОСа. Хотя там принцип выселения. То есть говорят, выселяйтесь не открытым словом, а говорят, вот СПОС предлагает вам выселиться в город, либо в поселок соседний, либо мы вам построим новый поселок. Но это же факт выселения. Это никак не СПОС. Аналитики Никелева преподносят как СПОС. И даже есть международные эксперты и российские эксперты, которые подтвердили, да, это СПОС. Мы категорически возмущаемся. Но аналитики Никель, откровенно покупая местных лидеров.
Геннадий, большое спасибо за выступление. Я просто будет возможность вопросов и ответов. И есть возможность остаться в Zoom для того, чтобы ответить на вопросы. Thank you so much. We're 30 minutes behind the schedule at this point, and of course, we started a little bit later, but I'm going to make an executive decision to continue on and do the performance and lunch after we're done with the presentations, so that we could go on uninterrupted with our stories, if that's okay. Thank you so much. I would like to bring in Carlos Mamani for a short intervention from Bolivia. Carlos, don Carlos está aquí por su intervención, por favor.
Muchas gracias, Galina, y buenos días a todos. Quiero presentarme, soy Carlos Mamani Condouri. Justamente vivo en una comunidad que se dedica a extraer sal de las salmueras que abundan en mi territorio y tradicionalmente hemos vivido vendiendo sal, pero el territorio con un salar mucho más grande es Uyuni, ¿no? Y pues ahora estamos preocupadísimos de lo que puede pasar. Me han pedido que hable acerca del triángulo del litio y después referirme a lo que pasa en Bolivia, ¿no? El triángulo del litio se encuentra ubicado en los Andes, en el territorio andino, y es de alta montaña, que ahora es compartido por Argentina, Bolivia y Chile, ¿no? En Argentina está en 3 provincias, en la provincia de Catamarca, en la provincia de Jujuy y en la provincia de Salta, y están en plena explotación, ¿no? Y hay bastante preocupación y también la lucha de los pueblos indígenas por defender su territorio, por cuanto como somos territorios de alta montaña y es donde escasea el agua. Además, no es solamente alta montaña, sino que son territorios semidesérticos, ¿no? En Chile está en el desierto de Atacama, se llama Salar de Atacama, ¿no? Y ahí los pueblos afectados, como en la Argentina, son los collas, los atacameños, que también se llaman licanantay. Lo mismo pasa en Bolivia, ¿no? En cuanto a Bolivia, el territorio afectado se encuentra en Uyuni, que es una enorme lago de sal de 11,000 kilómetros cuadrados, y en Aymara se dice Jayocota, lago de sal, y a este gran lago de sal se suma 2 salares más, uno que se llama Pastos Grandes, que está en el departamento de Potosí, y Coipasa, que está en Oruro. Y el pueblo afectado es el pueblo Lipi, un poco de los Carangas, que todos son collas, porque antiguamente todo ese territorio que hoy es compartido por Bolivia, Argentina y Chile era parte de un enorme pueblo que se llamaba el Collasuyo, y todos somos collas, hablamos el aymara o lenguas que son parientes lingüísticamente de este idioma, ¿no? Para tener una idea de qué estamos hablando, pues Bolivia tiene, según el Servicio Geológico de Estados Unidos, 21 millones de toneladas métricas certificadas. Argentina está en segundo lugar con 19 millones de toneladas métricas y Chile, por su lado, posee 9 millones de un total de 80 millones que están certificados en el mundo. A diferencia de la Argentina y de Chile, Bolivia administra sus recursos de litio a través de la empresa estatal Yacimientos del Litio Boliviano. Olvidé decirles que tanto en la Argentina como en Chile, la explotación es a través de empresas privadas y tanto los salares argentinos como chilenos ya están en plena producción y son grandes exportadores mundiales. En el caso de Bolivia, la producción y exportación es aún en pequeños volúmenes de cloruro de potasio y carbonato de litio. También tiene en operaciones una planta piloto de litio, ¿no? Que se prevé produciría baterías en 6,000 unidades para alcanzar un tope de 20,000. Pero todo eso está en papel escrito, no tenemos aún la producción. ¿Qué pasa con la participación de los pueblos indígenas? La Constitución Política del Estado Plurinacional del año 2009 y la Ley 341 de Participación y Control Social del año 2013 dispusieron la creación de espacios permanentes de participación y control social en las empresas públicas, cuál es el caso de Yacimientos de Litio Boliviano. La participación social en yacimientos de litio bolivianos solo ocurre con las audiencias públicas que hacen para la rendición de cuentas, ¿no? Hubieron apenas hubieron este tipo de audiencias públicas una vez al año, ¿no? Y donde los funcionarios de las empresas hacen como presentaciones de 10 a 20 diapositivas, ¿no? Y que no hay ninguna análisis del tema que se está presentando, es más bien, digamos, de propaganda, ¿no? Y lo que sí más bien hubo es que para los estudios de evaluación de impacto ambiental, para conseguir las licencias ambientales, la empresa hizo dos consultas, ¿no? La primera fue el año 2012, que fue ante todo un evento informativo donde se mostraron algunas preocupaciones de organizaciones cívicas de la región. Esto es de la región de Uyuni. El acta, que apenas era de 3 páginas, no explica el impacto de las piscinas industriales de evaporación, como tampoco las afectaciones al medio ambiente, pero sí, en cambio, tuvo el tiempo y el espacio para presentar el informe de la empresa estatal, diciendo, por ejemplo, que requerirá 20 metros cúbicos por 100 toneladas de cloruro de potasio producido y que las fuentes afectadas serán los humedales de San Jerónimo, que es de agua dulce, y Río Grande, que es de agua salada. La segunda pública fue el año 2018, en vistas de la construcción de la planta industrial de carbonato de litio. El acta apenas es de 2 páginas. Entre los asistentes estuvieron diputados nacionales, alcaldes, autoridades locales y comunidades afectadas, que eran Río Grande, Yica, Colchani, Pampa Grande, Colchacá, San Pedro de Quemes, Villamar, Soniquera, Julaca, Pozo Cavado y Culpinacá. Todos ellos expresaron sus preocupaciones sobre el uso del agua, la contaminación que podría generar la extracción de litio y en la sistematización de la empresa tampoco se ve estas preocupaciones, sino solamente la cantidad de felicitaciones que recibe como empresa estatal. Entonces, pues no hubo desde Yacimientos de Litio Boliviano el diálogo con los pueblos indígenas para llevar el proceso de consulta para el consentimiento libre, previo e informado, como está estipulado por la Constitución, por el Convenio 169 de la OIT, la Declaración de las Naciones Unidas sobre los Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas, que en el caso de Bolivia es Ley 3760 del año 2007. Entonces, quiere decir que la declaración pues tiene carácter vinculante, a diferencia de otros países que no ha sido elevado a rango de ley. Entonces, para la empresa Yacimientos del Litio Boliviano, es como si los pueblos indígenas no existieran. Y este es un asunto de lo más complejo. Desde el año 2012 y 2013, las organizaciones de pueblos indígenas, Confederación de Pueblos Indígenas de Bolivia, SIDOB, que representa a los pueblos indígenas de la selva, el Consejo Nacional de Ayllus y Marcas del Collasuyo, CONAMAC, que representa a los pueblos de alta montaña, fueron intervenidos y ocupados. Desde esa fecha, las dos organizaciones se encuentran sujetas al gobierno, no ejercen el derecho a la libre determinación. Entonces tenemos un gobierno que justifica su accionar en el supuesto de que es un gobierno indígena, incluso defensor de la madre tierra, defensor de los derechos de los pueblos indígenas. Sin embargo, en la práctica, los pueblos indígenas están impedidos de expresar su voz, sus reclamos por sus derechos, y menos les escuchan en los planteamientos sobre su derecho a la participación en un recurso que se encuentra en su territorio. En la época colonial, cuando el país era parte del Imperio Español, la extracción de la sal, del salar de Uyuni, era monopolio de los ayllus. Lo que estoy mostrando es cómo una potencia como España había reconocido ese derecho a los pueblos indígenas, pero en tanto el llamado Estado Nacional, y no siquiera solamente Estado Nacional, sino el Estado plurinacional, desconoce en absoluto la titularidad de los pueblos indígenas sobre su territorio y sobre un recurso que el Estado llama estratégico. Entonces,
Don Carlos, muchas gracias por su intervención. Thank you so much, Don Carlos. I think we need to kind of move on with our program. It's we're a little bit behind our time, and I really would like to be able to bring you back for the Q&A session. If we could move to Christoph Widmer, the co-director at the Society for Threatened Peoples, for the next presentation, to talk about their role in the coalition, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Galina. I appreciate this possibility to speak to you. STP, that's the Society for Threatened Peoples. We are a non-profit organization campaigning for the rights of indigenous peoples and minorities since more than 50 years, a little bit older than cultural survival. And since 15 years, we are working on the free, prior, and informed consent for all projects related to business, especially in mining or logging or other construction of infrastructure and so on. And why we came to that point: Switzerland is a small country, but it has a huge economic footprint. It hosts a lot of mining and oil giants and commodity traders like Glencore, Vitol, Trafigura, Mercura, or Cargill, for example. And then we discovered another one that we didn't know really before. It's called Metal Trade Overseas. And when we researched there, we discovered that this is part of the Nornickel, let's say, of the Nornickel group, and that this Swiss company is dealing with all the nickel that Nornickel is producing. So we had great opportunities to work together, for example, with Gennady, and to make pressure on the Swiss company trading with a Nornickel, with a nickel of Nornickel. And we also went to visit the other big economic players, the Swiss banks, UBS and Credit Suisse, to urge them or not to give any credits anymore to Nornickel as long as they don't respect the rights of indigenous peoples, or then to use their leverage to make them change their position towards for example, the community of Gennady. So examples of our success in 2008 already, we produced a study on the free, prior, and informed consent in sustainable forest management in the Congo Basin, with the result that the Swiss big enterprises, IFO, Interholco, and Precious Woods became one of the best logging operations in the Congo Basin. And today we can say they do quite well respect the rights of indigenous peoples, especially of the Baka people, Pygmy people of the Congo Basin, and the Bantu communities. And we also, after 10 years of campaigning, we convinced the Swiss gold refiners, who controls, well, let's say some 2/3 of the world market of gold, to make a political statement very, very recently, where they say that in Brazil, for example, the government should respect the rights of indigenous peoples, that they will not buy any gold anymore from illicit sources or from sources where the free, prior, and informed content has not been given to the company that is collecting the gold, for example. So our methods and strategies, if, for example, a conflict appears with indigenous communities somewhere, we check there, we enter in contact with the indigenous communities and look if there is a hook to Switzerland. And then we design together with the indigenous communities how to develop a campaign where are, let's say, the producers, the customers, the financier of that company. And if they are, especially in Switzerland, we can put all the pressure in Swiss media, Swiss politics, Swiss enterprises to go towards the free, prior, and informed consent. So we use, for example, even the complaints in the juridical system, but also soft law opportunities like the national contact points of the OECD, which gives brilliant opportunities to negotiate with companies who are not really willing to negotiate. So this is quite an interesting tool. And we also offer access to the United States and United Nations in Switzerland, in Geneva, for example, Human Rights Council. So if we work together with indigenous peoples organizations, we can offer them to get direct contact to the United Nations in Switzerland. Another example I want to tell here, because you might know though the problems that appeared, we had problems with CS, but it's not cultural survival. It's a Credit Suisse. In the case of a Standing Rock, with the huge problems in the United States because of the pipeline, we brought this Credit Suisse to the Swiss national contact points. And after 2.5 years of negotiations, we got like a policy change in the Credit Suisse policy to only finance projects if in case of indigenous people's involvement, that they have given the free, prior, and informed consent. The same we did with an energy organization or company in Bern. They had big problems with the Sami people in Norway due to a wind park where the Swiss company was investing. And also there, they will not invest anymore in future if there are problems with the right to free, prior, and informed projects. So finally, we now want to bring our experience and our exchange in the transition minerals. I think we have very, very great opportunities to make in the SIRGE coalition all these, to bring everyone together, to get much more leverage, to really make the big companies change their behavior, to put pressure on political issues, on legal aspects, and then finally on the state authorities that they take the responsibility to finally guarantee that the enterprises respect human rights. So I'm really looking forward for this cooperation within the SIRGE. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christoph. And so our next speaker is Raquel, Earthworks. I'm really happy to present Raquel and her work. Maybe you can introduce yourself in your own way. And of course, we're going to be talking, your presentation is dedicated to circular economies, reuse and recycling. Yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Raquel Dominguez. I use she, her pronouns. I am the circular economy policy advocate for Earthworks, which is an organization dedicated to supporting communities affected by oil, gas, and hard rock mineral extraction. Excuse me, sorry, I have really bad allergies. So I'm here to talk about why it's really important to look at any just transition to a renewable energy economy has to be done through a circular economy as opposed to a linear economy. As we've heard, extractivism is to put it mildly, a huge problem all across the world, overwhelmingly benefiting global North countries, many of which are former colonial powers, current colonial powers, and settler colonial states. And so for that reason, they're very invested in maintaining this linear economy that the global economy currently operates under. In a linear model, everything is extracted, used, and then removed from the economy. Everything is designed for one singular use, which obviously puts an incredible amount of strain on communities on the front lines of extraction and disposal. Because of that, these global North states are supportive of the mining industry's rhetoric about how the only way to transition to a renewable energy economy is through increased mining, increased and intensified mining. And that is simply not true. There are other ways to construct economies. Economies are a social construct, just like any other policies. And we, the people, can force governments to change their policies for the betterment of the entire world. There's no binary between climate action and or climate inaction and increased mining. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that circular economy policies are already being implemented all over the world in different countries. Japan in particular has really great rare earth element recycling policies. South Korea has really great recycling policies. Stuff like that. So in the United States, some really obvious policy options are for reducing car dependency. Across the world, passenger transport is the largest single producer of greenhouse gas emissions. If we reduce car dependency, especially in the United States, which has more cars than any other country in the world, despite not having a particularly large population, that would be massively important in decreasing demand for extraction. That would be really important for decreasing demand for minerals such as lithium, cobalt, nickel, et cetera, things that are called critical minerals in the United States. But like moving away from car dependency also has major public health impacts. It means better cardiovascular health, less pollution-related illnesses, things like that. So that is like the most obvious option, I think, for circular economy policies in the United States, is just reducing car dependency. But others include more long-term things like city densification, reducing suburban sprawl, just investing more in pedestrian and bicycle transit. These are all incredibly possible and relatively short term all over the world, especially in economies with emerging cities, because it is possible to obviously like shrink and make suburbs better, more environmentally friendly, but it's easier to prevent sprawl from existing in the first place. But overall, the important thing is that we globally move from this assumption that everything we have needs to be extracted, used, and then disposed of. It's entirely unnecessary, and it's entirely possible to change.
Thank you so much. That's such an important message. Thank you. A huge round of applause to our speakers today. So we're going to close this segment for now. I know that we all need a little bit of a break. We need some food. We're trying to appeal to all of your senses today. So we'll have a beautiful presentation by Pavel Suliandziga Jr. While you're taking your break, please grab some food and come back to listen to performance. And we will be back for another segment. Please stay. And our online audience, please stay, grab your water, your food. We're still here. The next segment is going to be not less wonderful, interesting. So yes, I did my pitch. All right, let's take a break.
Oh.
Is the audio coming from the piano here?
Wow. Yeah.
You have everything you need? Okay.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Maybe I can say something in my.
This one right here.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's okay. Hello, everyone. Hello. Please enjoy your food. So me and my friend, who is a pianist, Sergey, will sing a little bit for you. So I'm representing a Udege people of far east of Siberia. It's a tribe which is only 1,500 people left. We have our own traditions, and we're hunters, fishers, and gatherers. So I'm a professional opera singer. I studied in Moscow in Russian Academy of Music. Then I came here to study. I studied at Mannes College of Music. So I'll be singing a little bit of classical music for you. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. So the first song is Italian song Non ti scordar di me, which means don't forget about me. Thank you.
Partirono le rondini dal mio paese freddo senza suono. cercando primavere di viole, nidi d'amore e di felicità. La mia piccola rondine partì senza lasciarmi un bacio, senza un addio partì. Non ti scordar di me, la vita mia legata a te. Io t'amo sempre più, nel sogno mio rimani tu. Non ti scordare di me, la vita mia legata a te. C'è sempre un nido nel mio cuore per te. Non ti scordare di me. Non ti scordar di me, la vita mia legata a te. C'è sempre un nido nel mio cuore per te. Non ti scordar di me.
Okay, the next Italian song called Parlami d'amore Mariu, which means talk to me about love, Maria. Thank you.
Come sei bella, più bella stasera, Mariù. Splende un sorriso di stella negli occhi tuoi blu. Ma che mi importa se il mondo si burla di me? Meglio nel gorgo profondo, ma sempre con te, sì con te. Parlami d'amore, Mariù, e tutta la mia vita sei tu. Gli occhi tuoi belli brillano, fiamme di sogno scintillano. E dimmi che illusione non è, e dimmi che sei tutta per me. Qui sul dolor non ne soffro più. Parlami d'amore, Mariù. So che profondo ma sempre con te, sì con te. Parlami d'amore, Mario, tutta la mia vita sei tu. Gli occhi tuoi belli brillano, fiamme di sogno scintillano. Dimmi che illusione non è, dimmi che sei tutta per me. Qui sul tuo cuore non soffro più, parlami d'amore, Mario. Qui sul tuo cuore non soffro più, parlami d'amore, Mario.
And one more Italian song called Ti voglio tanto bene. I love you so much. Thank you.
Una stella brilla in mezzo al cielo, la stella mia sei tu, sul mio cammino, tu m'accompagni, sei quel mio destino, tu sei la vita e la felicità. Dimmi che l'amore tuo non muore, e come il sole d'oro non muore mai più. Dimmi che non mi sa ingannare, il sogno mio d'amore per sempre sei tu. Cara, ti voglio tanto bene, non ho nessuno al mondo più cara di te. E tu, sei tu il mio grande amore, la vita del mio cuore, sei solo tu. Ti voglio tanto bene, non ho nessuno al mondo più cara di te. E tu, sei tu il mio grande amore, la vita del mio cuore, e sei solo tu.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Let's go back where we left. I hope our online audience is able to reconnect with us. It's 11:10 Eastern. I just wanted to express my utmost gratitude to Pavel Suliandziga Jr. for his brilliant performance, his talent. There is an incredible amount of talent among young Indigenous people, youth. So just welcoming everyone back and taking their seats, bringing your food, your drinks with you. We will continue go on with our program. I'm really honored to be here in the space with friends, relatives, brothers and sisters from many corners of the world, our Indigenous and allies, Indigenous brothers and sisters and allies. So let's gather together for the next segment. I wanted to bring to the stage my dear friends from A Growing Culture, an incredible organization that pushes the narrative. A lot of you might know, follow the social media, might know A Growing Culture and their brilliance. It is my pleasure to introduce Lauren and Gio, who will be kind of tying the storylines together and bringing to the sacred circle of this story and sharing their thoughts about centering Indigenous self-determination, sovereignty, and transition to a green economy. Thank you so much.
This one? Yep.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Galina.
Yeah, thank
Cultural
you.
Survival, Earthworks, everyone who's here, online and digital. It's an honor to be here with everyone.
I echo all of those sentiments. My name is Gio Serrano. This is Lauren Cardelli. We are part of Growing Culture, and we wanted to have essentially a bit of a conversation. I think we're going to try to limit our time because we also want to be able to open up to some conversation and make sure that we're bringing voices in, bringing many of the voices that you heard already back, and making sure that this is sort of conversational in tone. So we're going to start that by having a conversation ourselves. And one thing that struck me as I was listening to all of the amazing voices this morning actually came from Gary McKinney. Gary, if you're still online, I hope I'm representing your words well. But something that I heard you say was, there are those who have never heard of Thacker Pass. And if they have heard of them, or if they have heard of Thacker Pass, it's usually only the sort of mineral aspect of Thacker Pass, or it's the cultural aspect of Thacker Pass. So a thing that I'd like for us to start this conversation with the theme of self-determination is the need for a connection between land, climate, food sovereignty, which is really the thing that A Growing Culture focuses on, and culture.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think it's really important to contextualize how interdependent both those systems are. If you mapped out cultural diversity, bilingual diversity around the world, right? And then you took another map parallel and mapped out biological diversity, those maps would look almost identical, right? The problem now that we face is if you mapped out climate change vulnerability, it's going to mirror that same map. And the industrialization is if you mapped out land grabbing over the last 20, 30 years, it's predominantly around that same epicenter, same places, right? There is no cultural diversity without biological diversity. There is no biological diversity without cultural diversity. How do we know this? Is that, as Galina mentioned, Indigenous people represent 6% of the world's population, but yet safeguard 80% of the world's sacred biodiversity, right? SIRGE Coalition has identified that about 80% of these precious minerals needed in the green economy are within a 35-mile radius of indigenous reservations in the United States alone, right? This is no circumstance, right? These systems of conservation, of mutual living, of reciprocity are all tied to alternative models of engaging with the environment. This is so foundational to how we look at conservation, how we look at climate change, and how we look at the solutions moving us forward.
You know, I think so much of the conversations around that tend to be rooted in sort of like scientific fact and sort of the dominant narratives that we talk about are often rooted in, you know, what our sort of faith is in the ability to kind of look at the facts and the figures and percentages and that sort of thing. And I think as sort of a counterpoint to that, we like to think in terms of storytelling, which centers notions of oral history and indigenous ways of sort of sharing, knowledge sharing. Can we talk a little bit about how that is a pathway to self-determination?
Absolutely. I think when we look at our world around us right now, right, with digital media on the rise, with what many would see as authoritarianism, with pandemics, we are often confronted with narratives around false information or misinformation, false fake news, right, wherever we are around the world. And it's really interesting to see this kind of relationality we have with facts, right? And where what is really governing us, our moral and ethical codes, our faiths, our national identities, are built on fact, not facts, but stories that we've been told, right? Capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy are not upheld by facts, but by narrative and stories that we are fed and conditioned through our society. And yet, like, it's really important to see these stories, because I think right now, when we look at the world around us and we see that there is a lack of trust in institutions, right? Whether it's the media, whether it's the World Health Organization, whether it's the UN, whether it's governance, we still continually put our faith in those institutions to solve for these problems, right? And I think that's a really interesting aspect, especially when coming up next month is the 27th anniversary of COP, the climate change event at UN, and how much success has these institutions and these events created versus where's the real change happening at the communities that we heard, at the grassroots all around the world. And I think storytelling needs to shift where we put our faith and turn it back onto ourselves. And for our ability to organize locally, communally, collectively for the systems and the world we want, we have to, why do we keep putting faith in the very institutions that we're losing faith in, right? And I think that's also part of the narrative that we're told. And I think every one of us has incredible potential here, right? I think the world is filled with allies. Some might be imperfect, right? They want to put their energy in the right place, but I think we have to figure out collectively where we can put that energy and how to direct that energy to restore agency, to fight for true solutions that are rooted in self-determination of indigenous peasant people, right? We talked about conservation, but I think we can also talk about food, right? 70% of the world's food consumed is produced not by industrial agriculture. Yet we put our faith as development, as policy and investment into these systems. It's produced by peasant and indigenous and smallholder communities around the world that only represent a fraction, less than a fifth of the world's cultivated land, right? These are narratives that uphold these systems of exploitation and destruction, and we need to rethink that to consciously seed a new belief system for all of us. And I think, Gio, you work so much in this communication space, and where are you seeing these narratives working and where are you seeing them failing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I'm trying to like think about your question, and also your commentary just now took me into so many different places. I think one thing that we're sort of focused on in the work of a growing culture is really about creating sort of like a narrative shift around storytelling. So like, just to take a step back for a second, the notion of this sort of like global monolith of storytelling is the sort of dominant narrative is very sort of like singularly focused. It's about creating a singular world, one that I think kind of sounds nice when you think about it from a greenwashing perspective, where you're like, this is one story, we are one people, there is unity, and all those things sound really nice. But there is also this notion of like that approach being sort of like a narrative imposition.
Yes.
And so from a storytelling perspective, I think one of the things that we really are geared toward is raising many stories. And we have this idea of like a many world. I feel like you say it better than I do. I forget.
A world of many worlds versus a one world, right? And if you look at so much of the climate change solutions that will come out of COP, right, will be ones based in cultural imposition of a one world, right? Pushing where a set of people define the values and beliefs that all of humanity should have, and they impose that on the rest of the world as a top-down solution system. We need to move away from these systems of uniformity, right? And I think capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, industrialization, this extractive systems are systems of uniformity, and we have to move to plurality, to a world of many worlds and of many ways of relating and engaging. And indigenous communities that we work with all the time tell me, they say, Lauren, white people want the how, not the why. They want our solutions, but they don't want to understand why those solutions are birthed in our communities, because we have a different way of relating. And I think that's where we have to fight for. And if our solutions are imposing on another communities a way of relating with the environment, with each other, then those are false solutions.
Yeah, that like how versus why question is always really interesting to me, because I think that our narrative work actually lives quite a bit upstream of that question. Even like before we even get to the question of how we should solve this or why we should solve this, the question almost is invariably like, what are we even looking at? And I think the dominant narrative would tell us that the world exists in this way. And I think the thing that we were trying to solve through narrative storytelling and narrative change is, well, actually the world is not the way that we've been told the world is. The way is all of these many worlds. And before we can even contemplate questions like the how or the why, there needs to be sort of clarity of stories around all of these different communities and from all of these different communities.
Absolutely. And we heard multiple stories today that every one of us felt in our hearts. We were inspired by, we were moved by. There is no singular experience. There's no singular indigenous experience. There's no singular experience of these communities around the world. There is a plurality, and every story has a way of moving us, right? Like I was in Uganda last year, and we were working against the predatory seed policies that are being pushed, that are criminalizing indigenous seed, actually making it illegal, right? And we were working in a community and a woman came to me and said, hey, will you come look at this? And she took me, we walked through the town and went behind her house, and there was this beautiful field of groundnuts, which are peanuts, right? And it was a drought, but they were still green and vibrant and full. And she said that the government came to her and said, they moved her for 20 years into an internal displacement camp because they couldn't protect against a warlord named Joseph Kony in the north of Uganda. And so the military showed up and said, you have to leave your home now, and we're moving you to a camp. And they said, you have a few minutes to grab your family heirlooms. And what did she grab was that seed. And every year she planted that seed at the edge of the internal displacement camp to keep that alive. Because that seed represents more than just seed. That is the thread that wove together her culture and her family story. And without that act, that variety would have been extinct and lost forever, right? This is so connected. Our stories, our cultural beliefs, our land, our seed, our water. And these are not questions about carbon. These are not questions about how many trees we can plant. These are really questions about community self-determination and agency and the ability to manifest the world that we all believe is possible.
Yeah, that's the work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Galina. Thank you for having us here today. Yeah.
So I think, Galina, do you want to come up next and we can kind of transition into a Q&A? Is that the?
Yep. Yeah, just moved me to tears because that's the gist of the story, as really exercising our self-determination, sovereignty, and agency as people. And I think the most precious gift that we can give to each other is teaching the lesson of agency, that I have the right, you have the right, we have the right as a collective. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I would like to transition, but before I do that, I want to talk about the future. I want to talk about the future of this coalition. So we launched on August 9th, the World Indigenous Peoples Day. But even prior to that, we have done so much to arrive to that moment. We traveled, Avesh, our programs director, and I, we traveled in March to Brussels to advocate the inclusion of references to Indigenous peoples and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in the new law that's coming out of Europe. It's called the EU Battery Regulation. The current draft contains the references to Indigenous peoples and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Now we have another task. The upcoming corporate due diligence law in the EU also needs references to Indigenous peoples, and most importantly, our right to free, prior informed consent. There's another law that's coming out of European Union, is the Raw Materials Act, that also needs references to Indigenous peoples and our right to free, prior, and informed consent. There's a lot happening in the United States. So we're working on all fronts. In the US, it's the mining law reform that, together with Earth Justice and Earthworks, we're spearheading the efforts to include the right to consultation, the right to FPIC as well, free, prior, informed consent. So that's on legislative front. Capacity building. We had our first FPIC, free, prior, informed consent dialogue with over 100 representatives of ancestral authorities in Guatemala and radio stations in Guatemala just past July, which was a huge success. We were able to dialogue with communities, what they know about, what experiences they've had with FPIC, and what are the best solutions moving forward. We're planning to have the same dialogue in South Africa next year. On grant making front, At Cultural Survival, we're launching a small community response fund as part of our Keepers of the Earth Fund, where we'll be able to support small projects of Indigenous communities impacted or that plan to be impacted by transition minerals, so that they can identify and support financially their self-determined needs. Water, supplies, training on FPIC, travel to the negotiation spaces, you name it. And communications, we have released this year, we have released a quarterly publication, thanks to Agnes, our communications lead at Cultural Survival, a whole issue of Cultural Survival quarterly dedicated to transition minerals and case studies. And we will continue publishing the articles online. We have launched our new website, and we will be populating that website and providing you up-to-date information on the situations on transition minerals globally. We have many events that are coming up, so please stay tuned. So we're planning an event during COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, possibly COP15 under the UN CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. There will be an event in late November in Geneva under the with the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Christoph and his organization will be the lead on that. I might be missing some of the other events, but maybe Pavel, can you help me identify some of the events that are coming up, and maybe you can come on stage to talk about some of the future plans, and I can probably translate. Look, actually, Kesha can probably translate. Just very quickly, I think before we go into Q&A.
Галина, спасибо большое. Да, вы
Thank
уже
you very much, Galina.
да, сказали уже немного про наши планы. Я хотел бы только чуть-чуть добавить, что первое, конечно же, самое главное в наших планах – это усилить потенциал общин коренных народов, чьи права нарушаются при развитии зеленой экономики.
As far as our plans go, I'd like to just add that our first and foremost goal is to increase the potential and the conditions of the indigenous communities who are affected by the expanding green economy.
Мы, конечно же, будем продолжать нашу работу с ключевыми игроками, с правительствами, с бизнесом, для того, чтобы создавать условия, помогать им создавать условия, при которых бизнесу было бы невыгодно нарушать права коренных народов.
We want to make sure that indigenous communities can create the conditions for businesses to realize that it's not advantageous to them to violate the rights of indigenous peoples, and we'll continue our advocacy with representatives of governments and business community along those lines.
Мы также продолжим работать с акционерами компаний, с инвесторами, так как мы это делали, например, при работе с компанией Tesla в том числе.
As we've done in our experience during the Tesla campaign, we want to continue engaging with shareholders and investors to educate them and to move them in the right direction.
Мы планируем работать с конечными потребителями, теми, кто будет пользоваться продуктами этой зеленой экономики.
We want to engage with the consumers as well, those who will reap the benefits of this green economy.
Наши представители примут участие в неделе зеленой экономики, которая будет в Берлине, Германии.
Our representatives are slated to participate in a week of dedicated to green economy in Berlin, in Germany, in October.
В ближайшее время мы соберемся, руководящий комитет соберется для того, чтобы обсудить нашу дальнейшую стратегию, дальнейшие планы.
The executive committee is planning to meet very soon to discuss our further strategy and plans.
вообще в завершении я хотел бы рассказать историю, которая была тогда, когда я был членом рабочей группы ООН по бизнесу и правам человека.
And in conclusion, I want to share a story with you, a story that goes back to my time at the UN Working Group for Business and Human Rights when I was the chair of it.
Мы в рамках нашей деятельности мы посещали разные страны, конечно же, встречались с правительствами, с бизнесом, с общинами коренных народов.
As we visited multiple countries, we did country visits as the working group, and of course, during those visits, we met with government representatives, business communities, and indigenous groups.
И вот когда мы встречались с бизнесом, встречались с правительствами, они рисовали такую очень красивую картинку, очень красивые сказки о том, какая идет большая работа, какая идет большая поддержка для общин коренных народов.
When we engaged with governments and businesses, they were painting a pretty picture for us. We were fed plenty of fairy tales about how much they are doing to support indigenous peoples in their countries.
И когда мы встречались с общинами коренных народов, когда мы приезжали на места, мы видели бедность, видели много проблем нерешенных, видели, как маргинализируются общины коренных народов.
However, when we visited the indigenous communities, we would see poverty, we would see plenty of unrealized problems, unresolved problems, and we saw how indigenous communities were marginalized within their societies.
И было такое ощущение, да, что вот эти группы, да, бизнес и правительство, и общины коренных народов, не то, что живут в одной стране, да, а что они живут вообще на разных планетах.
So the feeling that we had was that businesses and governments weren't just living in different countries with the indigenous communities. They were living on different planets.
Потому что одна сторона рисовала одну картинку, другая сторона показывала совсем другие.
Because each side was telling its own story and describing things very differently, completely opposite from each other.
И я думаю, что для нашей коалиции и для многих других организаций, которые занимаются защитой прав коренных народов, которые занимаются защитой окружающей среды, очень важно, чтобы вот эти картинки, да, которые рисовали бы, да, и показывали, как одна сторона, так и другая, чтобы они были все похожи. И в этом наша задача.
And I think it's key for us as a coalition, as it would be for any organization advancing indigenous people's rights or promoting, fighting for the environment. It's very important to find a similar picture where we can agree on and reconcile the images that we see from these sides.
И очень важно, чтобы те, кто собираются пользоваться плодами зеленой экономики, да, и те, на чьих землях эта зеленая экономика добывается в виде ресурсов, да, чтобы все-таки они были, их достижения, да, были одинаковыми, чтобы этими плодами зеленой экономики пользовались как те, так и другие.
And as far as the products and the consumer side of green economy, it's key for those who use the minerals and for those who care after the lands where those minerals and resources are extracted. It's key for them to be closer to each other and for the people who live on those lands to also benefit from the green economy of today and tomorrow.
Спасибо.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Pavel. For concluding remarks, I would like to move to the Q&A segment of our presentation. We have a few questions online, and I wanted to first kind of ask our audience if we have any questions in the audience that we can address first. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Yael Danieli. I direct the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma. So we work with people whose trauma legacies have gone from generation to generation, and from at least 3 points of view. One is victims' rights. So for example, I'm sure you know that there is a resolution on the rights of future generations. And you're talking about that. You're actually talking about fulfilling the rights of future generations. So we have a special section on victims' rights, rights of future generations, and what we call reparative justice. That doesn't just have to do with reparations, but with repair, with healing, on every level of the environment, of the human beings, etc. And also including the issue of the cost of being an advocate, right? The danger we incur when we become advocates. Not only danger sometimes physically or politically, but psychologically, emotionally, etc. So all of this is part of what we do. We also have several working groups. We have a working group on indigenous issues in which we have several streams. One of them is environment, another is culture, another is the indigenous ways of preventing hunger. You've spoken a lot about all of it, so I don't need to repeat it for you. But they're very active, and we have series of webinars and all these things. So for example, on October 10, which in the United States is considered Columbus Day, and the indigenous people is considering it Indigenous Peoples Day, we have the second of a series on the indigenous residential schools that we started earlier. So I really am talking more in terms of inviting us to work together, because I think we belong together, and to continue dialoguing with you, and because we are together in this. So I don't have sort of a question. It's more like an invitation. Hello, we are all in this together.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And in a lot of indigenous cultures, we're thinking 7 generations ahead. That's the, thinking about the future. The actions of today will definitely affect our children, the children of our children, and everybody else.
Just a quick example. Tomorrow, next week, I have a meeting with Brazilian indigenous people who are fighting for their lands back, right? And we're fighting, so we are multidisciplinary. We have a lawyer, we have psychologists, we have all of the invited, all of the related disciplines. And for example, what I'm going to work with are the psychologists who will show how the loss of land creates a trauma legacy from generation to generation. Not just the land itself, but what does it do to people to lose a land, to lose their home? So
yes, a lot of our indigenous, it's that what will live this, unfortunately. Yeah, so the trauma that we live as indigenous peoples is the separation from the land. That's the original trauma, and that we truly believe in that. So thank you.
Muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Bueno, mi nombre es Tata Samuel Flores.
Good afternoon, everybody. Necesitamos una interpretación, por favor. Gracias.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samuel Flores.
Yo vengo de la nación Caracara, que está dentro del Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia.
My nation is the Caracara people within the plurinational state of Bolivia.
Bueno, yo les agradezco por escucharme. Es primera vez que llego a las Naciones Unidas aquí esta mañana y me quedé muy sorprendido.
Thank you so much. This is the first time that I come to the United Nations, and I'm very surprised, amazed.
Bueno, mi nación que les hablo es una nación que ha demandado en 1582 a la colonia.
Actually, my people has a legacy because in 1586, my people like demanded the state at that time, the colonial state at that time.
Bueno, actualmente estamos con demanda al Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia ante la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos.
Now we have a case against the Bolivian state before the Inter-American Court.
No hemos negociado ningún derecho con el Estado boliviano.
We have not negotiated any of our rights with the Bolivian state.
Porque vemos que los estados nunca cumplen los derechos humanos y estamos agotando este debido proceso.
As we see that the states do not respect human rights and all rights, and we are continuing with this process.
Yo no creo mucho en la autodeterminación ni la libre determinación.
I don't believe so much in the self-determination or the self-determination.
Porque la libre determinación solamente nos dicen que es cuestiones internas.
Because self-determination is considered something as an internal process.
Y la autodeterminación solamente son para los estados.
And the self-government is only for states.
Y los estados definen a nombre de los indígenas o llamados indios en contra de nuestros derechos.
And the states act against our rights as indigenous peoples.
Por eso, pues les felicito por la reunión que están aquí llevando y los aliento las acciones que están llevando con los pueblos.
I congratulate you in the work that you're doing and support you to continue with this work.
Y decirles un mensaje, que los derechos no se negocian.
And the message I want to give you is that our rights are not negotiable.
Y eso es lo que les auguro a ustedes.
And this is what I hope for you.
Y que las naciones y pueblos preexistentes
and that all nations, ancestral nations,
sean libres,
be free,
independientes,
independent,
como hemos sido antes de los estados.
in the way that we have been before the states were created.
Es lo que hemos dicho a Bolivia, tanto en hace pocos días estuve en la OEA, reunido con Luis Almagro.
This is what we say to the states. A few days ago, I was meeting with the Organization of American States, OAS.
Y también se lo señalé a la Comisión Interamericana en Washington.
And I also shared this with the Inter-American Commission in Washington.
Si es que ellos no hacen justicia para nuestros pueblos,
if there is no justice for our peoples,
mediante la Corte Interamericana,
through the Inter-American Court,
bueno, nuestros pueblos se sublevan,
our peoples are going to rise up.
como lo han hecho en el año 1781 en lo que es el Tahuantinsuyo, en el Collasuyo, de donde yo vengo.
As we did in 1781 in the as our people did in Tahuantinsuyo's resistance.
Es el mensaje que también los transmito a ustedes.
This is the message I wanted to share with you.
A unir fuerzas.
To unify our forces.
Y que nuestros pueblos sean libres.
And that our peoples are free.
Muchas gracias a todos y a todas.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, compañero. Muchas gracias por su participación y por su interés. Estamos en contacto, ¿verdad? Okay. I have some questions. Oh, Alejandra, maybe I'll get a question that came through Zoom. I know a lot of our participants are still with us online. There is a question from the state of Assam. Indigenous peoples, representatives of Indigenous people of Assam, who say that in our state, the Indigenous peoples have no self-determination. Through different Indigenous communities, they have councils, but they have no financial power. As desired by the state, the councils do not have finances. Tiwa missing, Diuri, Sanawal, Tengal, Rabha communities have their own councils, but they're not constitutional. I mean, like, are recognized, I guess. And many of the indigenous communities have any councils. So in reality, the indigenous peoples of Assam can't get the self-determination. So they are also seeking help from the UN and the global communities to support these communities and their ancestral lands and homelands. The help is necessary. Kindly advise us. So I think that the most important lesson that we've learned building this coalition, that we have to stay in solidarity. We have to support each other. Like the lessons that I wanted to share, that this work is only possible when we are together as indigenous people, supported by our allies. And the more people we have on our side, the better, because we can't do this alone. And if you are connected to our global community, that would be the first step. Write us, email us, we'll get connected. We'll try to bring your voice. We can publish your article on our website or our publication, Cultural Survival Quarterly. We can connect you to other organizations and other people. And this way we build our power and our solidarity, our agency, and again, self-determination. We do have self-determination. It's the first and foremost. The way we identify as indigenous peoples is through power of our self-determination, self-identification as indigenous peoples. So don't get disempowered. That's the message. Pavel, может быть, вы что-то добавите?
Я хотел бы сказать, что в вопросах прав коренных народов, наверное, да, не только в вопросах прав коренных народов, всегда есть две стороны медали.
When it comes to indigenous people's rights and rights in general, of course, there are at least two sides.
Первое, да, когда коренные народы настаивают на своих правах, надо всегда понимать, что с правами мы получаем и обязанности.
When we as indigenous people fight for our rights, we have to understand that when we gain those rights, we also gain responsibilities.
И поэтому об этом нельзя забывать, да, потому что мы очень часто предъявляем к правительствам, к бизнесу, с другим сторонним органам и организациям какие-то требования, но я считаю, что очень важно, чтобы мы понимали, что есть требования и к нам, да, что мы получаем наши обязанности.
We often, when we get those rights, we put forth demands to the government, to businesses, but various things. We have to remember that we also have responsibilities in the society when we get those rights.
И я очень часто говорю своим соплеменникам, своим коллегам из числа коренных народов, что ключ, точнее, к решению проблемы коренных народов имеет два ключа. Да? Один ключ у государства, второй ключ у нас, у коренных народов.
And I keep reminding my fellow advocates and my people in the Udege community that there are two keys that will solve our problem. Is one key is held by the government, and we have the other key as indigenous peoples.
И если какой-то ключ не работает, проблему невозможно решить.
And if one of those keys doesn't work, the problem will remain unresolved.
Поэтому я считаю очень важным, чтобы свой путь мы, коренные народы, вопросам самоопределения, самоуправления также проходили.
And so I think it's important for us as indigenous people to follow our path when it comes to self-determination and self-governance.
Здесь уже вот задали вопрос, где говорилось, что у нас нет ресурсов, да, у нас их мало ресурсов, материальных, административных, людских ресурсов.
Someone mentioned that we lack resources, administrative resources, human resources, financial resources.
Но у нас есть сила, да, наша сила. Сила – это в солидарности, сила – это в единстве, и поэтому мы должны этим воспользоваться и использовать это.
But we have our strength. Our strength is in solidarity, it's in unity, and we have to rely upon it to move forward.
Поэтому даже если иногда кажется, что проблема такая тяжелая, что ее невозможно решить, это не совсем так. Мы не должны терять надежду, мы должны двигаться вперед.
And even when it seems like we're facing insurmountable problems, they aren't unresolvable. We have to try, and we'll persevere, and as we believe and hope to do so.
Thank you so much, Pavel. I think, yeah, if I can reiterate that hope is important, and hope is a muscle. You know, you have to exercise it every day, because without hope, we can't continue, we can't go on. So please exercise your hope as a muscle every single day. I do believe that the future holds some really good answers and solutions for us, and the future is Indigenous. Anyway, thank you. So I know it's with 3 minutes before the top of the hour. I know that we have more questions. I want to ask the last question. I know that we have some participants, panelists online, and maybe there's a beautiful question that came. What does land back mean to you? It means a lot to many Indigenous communities. It means everything. And maybe we can ask Gennady, and we can ask Gary, if you're still there. Gary, what does land back mean to you? Hello?
Hey. Hey, that's a good question. Land back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we might have lost our audience. Hello?
Hello.
Right. Hello? Oh, Gary. So the question came from the audience. What land back means to you? Just briefly.
Land back. Good word. It means, you know, to me, land back is, you know, it comes from one of the brothers back in Paiute land, is to get back on the land, you know where the creeks are, know where your springs are, know where your significance is at. And if you know that, you know, go to it, go get your land back. To us, you know, we weren't always on reservations, and we knew where to hunt, we knew where to find that comfortability and the hospitality. And you know, they had their land, you know, and so to us, that's what it is, you know, get back on your land, get your land back. Thank you.
Thank you. Gennady. Thank you, Gary. Gennady, are you still there? Connecting us during nighttime in Russia, in the Russian Arctic. Геннадий, что для вас означает земля, возвращение к ней?
Возврат земли всегда очень для нас счастливый день будет, когда нам вернут землю. Это наш дом, наша защита. Это очень важно для нас было.
Спасибо. Есть что еще добавить?
В принципе, если возвращает дом, это счастье, это спокойствие. Будущее поколение будет в безопасности.
Thank you so much. Carlos, can you add a couple of words about what land means to you and what land back means to you and your people? Just a couple of words and we'll close.
Muchas gracias. La tierra para nosotros es madre, y no solamente porque llamamos madre, sino porque en nuestras narrativas nosotros hemos salido de la tierra. Unos han emergido de cuevas, otros de ojos de agua, de los lagos, del mar, de los ríos. Siempre consideramos que la tierra es nuestra madre. Hubo un sacerdote jesuita que llegó aquí como el año de 1600 y él escuchó decir que los indios llamaban a la tierra Pachamama, madre tierra fecunda y fructífera. Eso es para nosotros. Ella es nuestra madre, ella nos alimenta y cuando morimos también ella nos tiene en su regazo. Y entonces es lo más triste que un pueblo pues sea despojado de su tierra. Esa es la historia del pueblo mapuche en Chile y en la Argentina, que sus territorios fueron colonizados allá por los años 1800, 1870, después de un genocidio, y sus territorios hoy son ocupados por colonos que originalmente venían de Suiza, de Alemania, de España, de Italia, y entonces los mapuches hoy luchan por recuperar sus tierras. Es un dolor muy grande cuando uno no puede recuperar, no puede regresar a sus tierras. Aquí en los Andes, como estamos tan alto, a los 4.000 metros sobre el nivel del mar, no nos hemos salvado de ese tipo de colonización. Estamos con nuestra madre tierra. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Don Carlos. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your presence, your energy that you brought here in the space. I know it's been a long 3 hours, but I hope you've enjoyed. Again, we try to appeal through music, through storytelling, through food. Spiritually, we did a little ceremony before everyone came here. Thank you again, and we'll see each other in another space. Oh, okay. We have another intervention. 1 second.
Good afternoon. My name is Chonchaya Chalawin. I am a farmer from Thailand. I come here is first time for me, and I want to share my experience. คือตอนที่เราเป็นเด็กๆอ่ะคือเราถูกส่งให้ไปเรียนมหาลัยเพื่อที่จะเปลี่ยนแปลงชีวิตเพื่อให้มีแบบความร่ำรวยขึ้นแต่ในที่สุดเราไปแล้วเราไม่เจออะไรเราเห็นความสุขที่บ้านเราก็เลยอยากกลับบ้าน
When I was a child, I was sent to school, to university, because that was the answer to become more wealthy, to earn more money. But I didn't find happiness, and I wanted to come back home.
And เวลาที่กลับบ้านแล้วอาจารย์ครูของฉันก็สอนให้ฉันที่จะมีชีวิตอยู่แบบมีศักดิ์ศรีก็คือต้องอยู่กับป่า
But then a special teacher who's we can say taught her that the way to have sovereignty, the way to have wealth is you have to be able to live with the forest, to understand the forest.
ถ้าเกิดเราอยู่กับป่ามันเป็นขั้นพื้นฐานที่เราจะมีชีวิตที่อยู่ได้แล้วค่อยไปต่อสู้กับรัฐบาล
Because that will be the basis that we can provide for all of our livelihood, and then we will have the strength if we need to fight with the government.
คือขั้นพื้นฐานเนี่ยเราต้องมีกินมีใช้แล้วก็มีความมั่นคงในชีวิตก่อนที่จะไปสู้กับเขา
We need to have enough for our food, for the things we need in our life, and we have to have a security that we have reserves that we can also for our future.
แล้วก็สิ่งที่ต้นไม้มันจะต้องทำให้ต้นไม้เนี่ยตอบสนองชีวิตเราให้ได้ก็คือมันจะต้องมีเรื่องของผลิตภัณฑ์วันนี้เราก็เลยเตรียมผลิตภัณฑ์ให้ดูว่าส่วนหนึ่งมาจากป่าเป็นยังไง
And from the trees and the plants that live around us, we need to be able to understand how to use them to meet all the things of our life. And that means we have like medicines, we have foods, we have products, and so forth.
ค่ะก็ I have some my product if many people grow sugar cane ถ้าเกิดเราปลูกถ้าเราก็ปลูกอ้อยแล้วเราก็ขายอ้อยมันจะได้ราคาที่น้อยมากเราก็จะได้เงินน้อยแต่ถ้าเราใช้ความรู้เราไปก็จะเปลี่ยนมูลค่าก็คือตามที่ผู้ใหญ่วิบูลย์สอนว่าถ้าเราเป็นเราแบบมีศักดิ์ศรีมีทรัพยากรแล้วก็มีความรู้เราจะเป็นเหมือนโลกใบหนึ่งที่มันหมุนกลม
So this is an example. Many people grow sugarcane, but if you just sell sugarcane, you don't have much. But if you know how to process into sugar, and it uses it. Then you have like a circular economy. You can fulfill your whole things.
อันนี้เราก็ทำน้ำตาลอ้อยออกมาเป็นหนึ่งผลิตภัณฑ์ที่สมมติว่าอ้อยขายไม่ได้ราคาพอทำเสร็จคนก็จะมีงานทำแล้วไม่ต้องหนีบ้านไปไหนแล้วก็จะมีน้ำตาลขายด้วย
So with this, we don't have to leave our home. We have work that comes from our own resources, and we have a livelihood.
แล้วก็อันนี้ก็คือถ้าที่ประเทศไทยก็ทิ้งเลยมะพร้าวที่มันแบบร่วงมาเยอะๆคนก็ทิ้งแต่เราก็เก็บของที่มันทิ้งแบบไม่มีราคาอย่างเช่นมะพร้าวลูกนึงก็แค่ไม่ถึง5 บาทแต่พอมันเปลี่ยนมูลค่าแล้วน้ำมันมะพร้าวแบบก็เหมือนแบบลูกละ50 บาทเลย
And the same, there may be coconuts that have already sprouted, but they're not useful, but we can then make it into coconut oil, and it changes the value from being almost nothing to something that is very valuable for our own use.
เมื่อฉันได้โคโคนัทแล้วก็ต้องมาแปรรูปเป็นอีกทีหนึ่งเราก็มาทำสบู่นี้คือตอนเด็กๆเราเลี้ยงควายแล้วก็ทุกคนก็จะทำสบู่นมแพะนมแกะแต่เรารู้สึกว่าเราทำนมควายเพื่อที่จะเชื่อมควายกับสบู่ของเราที่มันไม่มีราคาเข้าด้วยกัน
And once we have coconut oil, we can further use it so we can make soap. And then she raised buffalo when she was a child, but now the buffalo, they don't have a place. So we use buffalo milk in the soap because we want to have the buffalo still in our culture.
เวลามันนิดเดียวเนาะหลังจากที่เราก็มีศักดิ์ศรีปุ๊บแล้วการที่เราได้เที่ยวก็คือนอกจากผลิตภัณฑ์พวกนี้เราขายเป็นผลิตภัณฑ์พื้นฐานแต่สิ่งที่มันได้มากกว่านั้นก็คือเรายังขายเป็นอันนี้เป็นรายได้หลักที่เราเลี้ยงครอบครัวเป็นรายได้ที่เราทำอะไรก็ได้ก็คือการขายคอร์สพอขายคอร์สเสร็จแล้วถ้าเราจะเที่ยวทั่วโลกแบบวันนี้ที่รู้กับทีมชวนมาก็คือเราสามารถเที่ยวฟรีได้ทั่วโลกแบบมีศักดิ์ศรีเพราะฉะนั้นตอนนี้เราแบบรู้สึกว่ามันอิสระโดยที่เราไม่มีแม้เงินสักบาทแต่เราต้องทำเรื่องป่าแบบประมาณนี้
We have a short time, but she says that besides this, once we restore our knowledge and our relationship to this, it's not only that we have product, but we become also, she's become a teacher. And because she's become a teacher, we had the very good fortune that Luke and Tim invite her to come to speak and even the opportunity to do some amazing thing around the world. So this is a basis. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing. See how much richness and diversity the event has brought together. That's what what we're all about, you know. We're only strong as a species in our diversity of views, of opinion, cultural expression, the colors of our skin, the colors of our eyes. And, you know, I want to end our beautiful presentations today with that note. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.